Welcome, everyone, and I want to thank you for coming to Essex County's Conversation of Your Life kickoff. This is an event in celebration of National Healthcare Decisions Day. My name is Tacey Silverberg-Urian, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's event. I am a certified hospice and palliative care nurse for VNA Barnabas Hospice at Clara Moss, Newark Beth Israel, and St. Barnabas Medical Centers. I'm also the chair for Essex County COIL Task Force, and I'm a Montclair resident. As a certified hospice and palliative care nurse, I witnessed the terrible struggles New Jersey residents must face at the end of life, too often complicated by the fact that many have never openly talked about what they want their end of life to look like. Let's face it, we live in a death-denying, death-phobic society, and we need to develop a comfortable language to talk about death, almost like death literacy. So I want to bring attention to a booklet that's called Never the Right Time. It's a tool to explore end of life with humor, and you kind of see them up. This is the book, and any professional that's attending today, if you could see Karen Martineau, she's the founder of Bevival. It's a social enterprise for developing death literacy. She's standing right here. See her for a free tool that you may be able to use with your organizations. Okay. Also, Montclair is developing a book group. It's called Before the End of the Book Group, where they read books to explore mortality. They sit around and talk about death. All right, so let's move on. COIL, or the Conversation of Your Life, is a program of New Jersey Healthcare Institute, who since 2014 has been working to change the culture around end-of-life care in New Jersey. COIL promotes community-based conversations around advanced care planning, and the goal is to increase the number of residents who have documented and communicated their end-of-life wishes. COIL is active in 11 counties and growing. In fact, across the state of New Jersey, similar forums are being held in 11 counties during this month in celebration of National Healthcare Decisions Day. In fact, the quality director of COIL, Adelisa Perez, informed us that our governor just signed a proclamation to declare April 16th National Healthcare Decisions Day. And this is to encourage New Jersey residents to communicate with their families and physicians what is important to them at life's end to save them from having to make emotionally taxing decisions when the time comes. And we're the second state to do that. So that's a big accomplishment. Okay, so did you know that in New Jersey, the average terminally ill patient spends his last days hooked up to a machine in the hospital? In fact, New Jersey patients near the end of life are treated more aggressive than their counterparts in almost any other state in the Union. In New Jersey, only 40% of our residents have advance directives. Nationally, 89% of people surveyed said healthcare providers should discuss how to navigate end-of-life decisions with patients. Yet, only 17% of those surveyed reported having talks with their healthcare providers. When asked, 70% of people want to die at home, surrounded by loved ones, but how many do you think actually do? 30%. The others end up dying in facilities. And you may be wondering, well, why? Why? So today, we've assembled an expert panel to answer questions about advanced care planning, obstacles, and to share different approaches to having the conversation. After we have the question and answer session, then we have two leaders, Mary Ellen Klein, the CEO and President of Clara Moss Medical Center, and Mayor Robert Jackson, who will take 5 minutes to share why advanced care planning is important to them. So without ado, if the panelists could please introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your role in advanced care planning or end-of-life care.
Thank you. My name is Shanna Siegel. I'm an attorney. I focus my practice on elder law and estate planning. And so I work with clients very often who are dealing with these issues. I'm going to do that. What a great idea. Okay. So many of my clients are facing end-of-life issues, and the ones who are prepared have a much easier time and can save their families a lot of money and heartache in dealing with these issues. So that's why I became a part of this task force, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Audrey Radin, and I am a physician practicing both internal medicine, but primarily now hospice and palliative medicine, which I've been doing for over 25 years. And so I've been working with many people in all aspects of hospice and palliative care and advanced directives in the hospital, home, and in nursing home settings.
Good afternoon. My name is Lou Monticchio. I'm Director of Pastoral Care for Barnabas Health Hospice and VNA. And in that role, I lead a team of 14 chaplains and spiritual care counselors who work with the doctors, nurses, and social workers in providing hospice care for patients and family members who are experiencing the progression of end of life. And so in doing that, we're trying to provide religious and spiritual counseling and support directly to the patient and to any family members, loved ones that are walking that journey with them.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sherry Starrett, and I'm retired. And when I started my career in 1979, I was a hematologist oncologist, and saw a lot of patients die. Death is not optional. We are all going to face it, just like we were all born, we're all going to die. I only worked as a hematologist oncologist for a few years before a lot of the great new drugs had come about, but then went into AIDS medicine. And so, again, saw a lot of death and dying. And how different people approached the end of their lives. Certainly with the AIDS epidemic, it was a younger population and a very different type of experience. So for the last 7 years of my career prior to retirement, I was very involved with working for 2 different insurance companies as a medical director, and very involved with geriatrics patients. And to step back a little bit, always concerned about medical futility. As I said, death is not going to be an option. So since we're all going to face it, we probably all should be prepared for it as well as we do for our trip or a dinner that we go to or what movie we're going to select. So I hope that all of you after today, if you don't get enough knowledge from us now, will want to pursue planning your death and hopefully will help get you started.
Thank you. All right, so I have a couple of questions that I'm going to pose to the different panelists. And then if you can hold your questions until we finish. And then we can take a few questions, but if we run out of time, I'd like for you to write them down with an email address and submit them to me, and I will make sure that we answer your questions. Also, this is part one of a 5 series that COIL is presenting. And there is a program in the back where we're going to be covering many different topics that have to do with preparation. One will be, the handout looks like this. So if you want to grab it before you go out, and make sure you pick up your 5 wishes before as well. Okay? All right, so question number 1. Dr. Starrett, what are advance directives, and do people need to be seriously ill to complete one, and is it ever too soon?
Okay, well, there's several different advance directives, and it's really sort of some sort of documentation about things that you might want to do if you were not capable of making your own healthcare decisions. So that's what part of this is all about. If you're able to make your own decisions, you're going to decide at the time of whatever happens what you want to do. But 2/3 of us are going to be dying from some sort of chronic illness of some sort, maybe frailty. A lot of us are going to live a long time and become frail, and we may not be able to make decisions for ourselves. So it's very important, as I said, we should be planning for when this happens ahead of time. So an advance directive from the New Jersey State website is a prepared written document to say what kind of medical care you would want if you're unable to make your own decisions. And there's 2, I'm not going to go into the third aspect, there's 2 pieces to that, and you can get that if anyone wants to come up. It's a very long URL. One is naming someone a durable healthcare, I want to get it right, durable power of attorney for healthcare, which I always call the healthcare proxy or healthcare agent. This is a person who you name who will be your decision maker if you're not able to make the decision yourself. It does not have to be a relative. It could be a relative. It could be a friend. The person has to be over 18 years of age. The person should be available, and the person should agree to doing the job. It's not an easy job. And it's a person with whom you should have had the conversations about how you feel you would want to be treated medically if you were not able to make your own decisions. It does not require an attorney to complete this form. Again, I'll give you the URL is very readily available, and New Jersey has 2 documents. So the first is the durable, the healthcare proxy, and the other is what I guess we would call a living will. These are legal documents. They're not medical documents. New Jersey now has a medical document, but I don't think we have time to really go into that right now. In the living will, you might specify different scenarios as to what you would want, how aggressive or how not aggressive you'd want to be if you were failing and perhaps actively, death was imminent. Is it too early to have these documents? Okay, everyone, even if you're 15 years old, should probably have a healthcare proxy. If you're 15, your parents are your proxies. But once you become, I guess majority, over age 18 or 21, your parents are no longer your proxies. So you name a proxy because, God forbid, you're the poor woman who was driving across Pleasant Valley Way, a nurse, a few years ago, and a tree fell on her. She died. But if she hadn't been died, let's say she became brain dead, and they wanted to put her on a ventilator, or maybe she was not totally brain dead, she would have needed a healthcare proxy. There are rules on deferring, what are called surrogates. So, but it's very good. You should have a healthcare proxy. You should have a discussion about what are your goals of care, and that comes up within the living will. And I'm going to stop talking in a second, but make sure someone knows where the documents are. And that they're readily available. This is a big problem.
Yes.
Every time I go to St. Barnabas for some, an x-ray or whatever, do you have a healthcare directive? Yes, I do. Then they say, oh, do you have it with you? No. And then I have to think, where is it? Well, it's in that. So when you fill out the forms, make sure you give copies to your proxy, to your doctor, and to your loved ones. so that everyone knows where it is.
Thank you. Dr. Radin, in your opinion, what are the biggest barriers to having end-of-life or advanced care planning conversation? And is there a way to start the conversation, like a conversation starter?
Kind of a loaded question. There's a lot of barriers, and a lot of the barriers depend on what situation you're in what type of disease process you are, what age you are, what your family situation is. What you really need to look at, how I always approach these conversations when I talk to patients and families, is first thing I do is I ask them what's going on in their life. And I want them to tell me. I don't want to say, I know what's going on. I know you have cancer. I want them to tell me what is going on, what their family situation is, what their medical situation is, to make sure we're all on the same page. Because that's the most important thing. We need to make sure they understand the disease process or where they are in life, because you can't make an informed decision if you're not informed. I also always point out to people when we're talking about what resuscitation is, what your options are, I said, forget what you see on TV, okay? Life is not like that. CPR, resuscitation it's very traumatic. It's not like it is on TV. And the statistics are that if you have an advanced disease, less than 15% of people will survive resuscitation. So having it doesn't mean that you're going to survive. And a lot of the newer forms do not say, do not resuscitate. They say, do not attempt resuscitation. And the other important thing to know is of those 15% that survive, when they've done a retrospective study 6 months later, only 2% are still alive. So doing resuscitation on someone with an advanced illness has a lot of repercussions. There's a lot of, it's not, I want to live. It's, how do you want to live? And so the conversation starters are really not even necessarily talking about the disease, talking about their life, talking about what's important to them. You know, if people tell me that their goal is to be home, their goal is to spend more time with their grandchildren, well, then their goal is not to be on a ventilator in an ICU where they can't speak, they can't eat, and the children aren't allowed in. So we need to kind of focus on exactly where people are, what they want. So we need to make sure they understand completely. And when they've really looked at, you know, many people, like Tacey was saying, the state of New Jersey actually ranks #1 in the country in poor end-of-life care. We have the highest rate of ICU days in the last 6 months of life, the highest expenditure by Medicare in the last 6 months of life, and the majority of people that even have do not resuscitate orders get them within the last 2 weeks of their life. So you're basically having a crisis, and what we were saying about the healthcare proxy is having an advance directive is the greatest gift you can give your family, because you are telling them what you want. Because I always tell the proxies, their job is not to make decisions. Their job is to advocate for the decision that the person would have made if they were able to. So by telling your family or whoever is your proxy what you want, that's more of a guarantee. I have many families that say to me, Mom wanted this, I don't agree with it, so what do I do? And I'm like, your job, what you agreed to do was to advocate for Mom. So, does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you. Lou, do you think that religious or cultural issues can be barriers to having end-of-life care, and how best is this addressed?
Thank you. So when we're talking about religious traditions, right, and even cultural aspects of a person's life, what we found is it doesn't really, some people are very connected to their religion, right, and it's a very much an active part of their life. Others maybe were raised in a various religious tradition, but not as active, all right? So it's the full spectrum. But when we approach end-of-life care, regardless of whether you're active or maybe not so active right now, there seems to be an interest on a lot of people's part in trying to understand what does my religious tradition say, about how to approach end of life, how to approach all these various treatments that I might be getting and procedures. And I think it's important for us to try and understand where each person is. How important is that to them, to understand that? And it's also important to realize that there's a lot of misinformation that's out on the internet and just in communities that they may be interacting with. So, and when I say misinformation, it's little bits of information that may have been collected by talking to someone, about what the particular faith says is required or not from an aspect of moral teaching. So one of our goals is to try and find out how important that is to them in their life and at this juncture, and to try to get them some of the best information so that they're really informed about what is their faith teaching them from a moral perspective, right? And, if you look around the spectrum of religious traditions, they all have different aspects, so it's important to get a very credible priest or an imam or a rabbi or a minister who's knowledgeable to consult with them and provide them what they need. But it's also, I think, important when we look at the swath that there isn't always, and this is where I think the myth comes in, that I need to have all these various medical treatments to sustain my life, that's required. That's where I think some of there's a fair amount of misinformation. So I think it's important to get grounded with the right information, and so that as you're preparing an advance directive, and you have copies of them here, I'll just make a point, even the one that's 5 wishes, right, which is a very generic advance directive, there's a spot in 5 wishes where you can put, if there's a spiritual restriction or a religious restriction, you could put that in the directive. So the premise is that you've spoken to someone. You've gotten some information for you to reflect on and then incorporate that into that document. The reason I just want to highlight that one is because the faith traditions that you may be a part of, you may be able to find also advanced directives that they promote, okay? And I've seen and I've read a number of them. I think the important thing, sometimes they can look like legal documents, okay, which after you're done reading them could create more confusion. Do you ever read a legal document that you think is going to answer a question and now you've got 10 other questions? So, and it's not done intentionally, it's just because they're trying to provide proper, like almost legal language, okay? So even if you have, let's say, a Jewish document or a Catholic document as an advance directive, from my experience, you're still going to want to probably sit down and talk to someone, talk to a priest, talk to a rabbi. What does this mean? And have a conversation, with the questions that you may have that are relevant to your life, and to be able to gain some information one-on-one. So, and I think I'm just going to share with you some of the, if you're not connected to a faith community and you're wondering, well, who do I speak to? I think the hospitals who have active pastoral care departments are probably some of the best places to go. Okay, they're promoting, I know in the hospital I did my clinical pastoral education, they would have days like this in the hospital. Pastoral care department would be an active participant in that, so that I would use those resources in your community if you don't have one, personally. And as far as the cultural aspects, I think there is an awareness that is an important part. Let me just share this story because I did some research. When I was preparing to become a chaplain, I would visit, there would be a patient who had a cancer diagnosis, right? And you would be outside the room and you would meet the family and they'd be like, don't tell mom. Don't tell mom that she has cancer, right? And I remember going back and reflecting on that and seeing, geez, I feel like I'm actually misleading the patient, by keeping that from him or her. And I did some research about, cultural, in some cultures, that's accepted, that the family is kind of responsible And, so it's good to realize that in some cultures, it's like, hey, the patient is the autonomous decision maker. They want to be informed. Other cultures are like, we're taking care of mom or dad. We'll process the information. So they did some surveys, though. This is the interesting part, where they surveyed the family members, and they very much fit within their cultural sensitivities, the way you would expect. When they did the survey of the patient in the bed, though, the cultural stuff kind of melted away a little bit. And they were like, if I'm in the bed, I think I want to know. So I guess it's important to just, those are there. But again, it depends on who you're talking to and what their needs might be.
Thank you, Lou.
Actually, I found when the patient, I was a cancer doctor for quite a few years, that they didn't want to, you didn't want to tell the patient. And if you made the mistake of telling the patient, you get into a lot of trouble. But when people start to become demented and are no longer cognitively intact, and especially once you become advanced age, a lot of them do defer to the family altogether. And the family, or especially if there haven't been a lot of conversations in advance, the family often, I shouldn't say often, will sometimes be more aggressive than the patient might have wanted to be at this stage of their life. And if you ask the patient, well, do you want to go on dialysis? And they say, oh, whatever my daughter says. And it may be that if they had been more alert when they're 88 years old, they might have said, when they were 78, they may have said, when I'm 88 and no longer have a good mind, I don't want to go on dialysis. So, again, when you become very elderly, you're going to be probably very deferential and do whatever your kids say, do whatever the kids want. And that may not in reality have been what you had wanted when you were a younger person.
Thank you. It's important. So Shanna, we often hear that completing a living will or advance directive requires a lawyer and costs money. Is this true?
I will actually tell you that what costs money is not completing an advance directive. So I will say that anyone can do an advance directive. You have the 5 wishes here, and that is a wonderful document, and actually the documents that we do in my office do largely reflect that. Sometimes attorneys do charge fees for doing advance directives, but there is no reason that should be a barrier, because you can get these documents off of the internet. You can complete a 5 wishes. You can do them at your hospital. And so there shouldn't be any barrier to doing that type of work. Now, in terms of, I say there's a cost of not doing it, let me just give a little bit more as to what that might be. So I, unfortunately, have handled many cases where an individual has come to me, a family has come to me, where the individual does not have the ability to make healthcare decisions anymore, and there is a dispute between very loving family members, all well-intended, as to what should happen to mom or dad or aunt or uncle or friend at that point. And in that scenario, often legal action is required. What will often happen is that a guardianship action will be initiated. Oh, yes, a guardianship action will be initiated, and then the family will present their evidence as to why they believe that whatever intervention they believe mom or dad would have wanted should happen. We also have situations where people do advance directives and they're not clear, or they have done several different documents at different times, and they maybe contradict each other. So it's really important to have the conversations, not just do a living will, but also do a proxy, naming an individual, because no document, however good it is going to deal with every situation. So you want to have that one person, one, not 3. Don't name all 3 of your children. You're not doing anything helpful, okay? So you need to decide who is the one person who you believe will best be able to step in and reflect your wishes at that time, and then name them. And that will save all of the cost and expense that we're, and really, it's not even so much about the cost. That's very important, but it's really about, this can divide families. You know, I've seen cases where siblings will never speak to each other again because of what has happened as a result of these, these fights. So it's really important to give that gift to your children and get it done.
Thank you very much. Now, there's much confusion between hospice and palliative care. And Dr. Radin, I'd really like it if you can please explain the difference and the value of each one.
Hospice and palliative care are very similar in that both focus on symptom management, quality of life, and assessing the whole person. But sometimes it's easier if you think about it as palliative care is like an umbrella. And underneath that umbrella are all the different aspects. There's symptom management, there's goals of care discussions, there's psychosocial and spiritual support. One of the things that's also under that umbrella is hospice care, because hospice is a type of palliative care, but it's meant only for patients who are at the end stages of their disease and are not pursuing disease-directed therapy, such as chemotherapy or dialysis or interventions such as that. So they're very similar in that way, okay? But sometimes people come in and they say, you know, oh, you're with palliative care, I don't want hospice. I'm like, well, it's a good thing because I'm not offering it, you know, but they're two very different things, but they both focus on symptom management. So palliative care is appropriate at any point in the disease process. And they're actually coming out with studies now that patients, and most of the studies have been done on cancer patients, that cancer patients who have palliative care earlier in the trajectory of their illness do much better in terms of quality of life, in terms of satisfaction with how they were treated. And the longevity is not affected significantly. There's not, and that's another thing even with hospice care, that when they've done studies on, there are certain diagnoses they've done studies on, congestive heart failure and certain types of cancer, that people actually live longer on hospice care than not on hospice care. Because by focusing on the symptoms and the quality of life, instead of just giving treatments that all have side effects, people actually do better very often.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to open it up to the audience. If anyone has a dying question, because I feel like we've run out of time.
How many times have you used that?
I'll repeat your question.
I just have a question for you. You said you don't need to use an attorney, but don't you have to have the document notarized?
No.
So the question was, the living will, does it need to be notarized?
An instruction directive needs 2 witnesses, okay? So with that, you would need either a notary or 2 witnesses. So it can be done in your home with witnesses. They should not be the person who's being appointed or a direct family member, okay? So get your neighbors or your physician. That's correct. It shouldn't be a healthcare provider, right? So you can do that with your neighbors. You can do that, you know, at gatherings like that, like this, absolutely.
So did you hear that in the back? For a living will, you do not need a notary, but when you do need 2 people who are witnessing your signature that cannot be related to you. Okay? One more question back there. I'll see if I can hear you.
I've got the paperwork, and advance directive, things like that. I also have noticed that I occasionally do review all my paperwork, but I think I'm going to do more scrutiny of the advance directives. One of my thoughts, and my few in my family have thought, it might be a good idea for Mountainside being my place of my ER flavor, if you will, to have a copy of some of that paperwork. I mean, it's in my files. It's also in my bank safe deposit box. But I don't expect you all to be reaching around finding that. It might be nice if you had it right smack in your community health information networks. Is that a good idea?
question is that she does have her medical advance directive. Mountainside is her ER of choice. Of proximity, and therefore, shouldn't they have a copy of it instead of her having it at home or in a safe deposit, as well as at home?
So this is a major issue, which I tried to sort of make a joke at, that you should have this readily available. There is something a little off topic, is out of hospital do not resuscitate form, which requires a physician's signature, but that's also available at the New Jersey website, and your doctor would have to sign that. Let's say you were terminally ill with end-stage cancer or something, and they always say, put that on your refrigerator, because if EMS or the rescue squad comes in, the default is to do CPR. And in the scenario I just painted, CPR would not be appropriate. But if you don't have that form right there, it will be done. Yes, you're absolutely correct that it is a dilemma. New York State has an electronic, what they call a MOLST form. New York State is ahead of us in this, and I think the New Jersey is hopefully going to work on having an electronic document. But, bringing it with you to the hospital, and if you're coming as an emergency, you've had a stroke, you're laying on the floor. The hospital will probably lose it somewhere. The charts have to be set up, and the electronic record has to be set up with an advance directive section where this stuff is scanned in and where they think to look. You get rolled into the ER, they may not look there, even if it were there. I'm sorry. So these are very important practical issues.
So do we know if, say, Mountainside is
I don't know what Mountainside or any of the hospitals are doing, but it's certainly something to strive for.
Excuse me, Mountainside Hospital, every time you go in for a procedure or blood work,
they
they
ask you.
always ask you,
And I said-
do you have it? And it's either yes or no.
But if you don't have it with you, and if you've just had a stroke, you're not thinking. So she's posing, using technology to make sure the most recent document is somehow on file.
So I just want to add a couple of notes about that. So certainly one of the things, if you are doing your documents with an attorney, many law firms will have an electronic version. We have had wallet cards. There are phone apps now, so you can have these documents with you at all time. Not even have to work with an attorney, right? Just scan it into your phone, okay? So there are ways to do this, okay? But that's not going to necessarily solve that problem, because a physician isn't going to look at your advance directive and say, oh, well, then we don't have to do X, Y, or Z, okay? So if you have a chronic serious illness or a terminal illness, there is another form, which is a POLST, a provider order on life-sustaining treatment, which you should do with your physician or advanced practice nurse. And in that situation, that will be part of your medical record, and so that is going to be honored at any facility, and it should be, even in the ER, that should be honored. So that would be something that if you fit that criteria, you can avoid having, treatment starting on you that would be inappropriate, because you don't have to have that be, evaluated by the legal office at Mountainside. POLST. POLST.
POLST.
Yeah.
It's a practitioner order for life-sustaining treatment. And I'm afraid we're out of time, but again, I'd like for you to write down your questions with an email address and bring it to me, submit it to me before you leave, and we'll make sure that we answer that question for you. So let's give a round of applause for the panel. I'd like to thank you again for your time and participation to help celebrate National Healthcare Decisions Day. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Mayor Jackson of Montclair and CEO Mary Ellen Klein who is the president and CEO of RWJ Clara Moss Medical Center. And I'd like to invite them up to the front. And if you could take 5 minutes or less to talk about or share why completing an advanced care plan is important to you.
I'll let Dr. Klein,
Dr.
Dr.
Klein?
Klein go first.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for putting on this very, very important program for the residents in the community. Really looking at your ability to share with us as healthcare providers what your wishes are so important. Hospitals do have bioethical committees that are set up if there's questions or issues, and we always want to know what is really important to you. And you need to know that we want to carry out what your wishes are. And as the panelists have discussed, it can be so very difficult if your children or your relatives who have taken care of you think, oh my gosh, I could not do that. But it's really down to what it is that you want and how can we help your loved ones get through that process so that they understand that this is about you, and we know that we need to support them in carrying out what it is that you want to have done. Having these discussions are never easy, but to know that just because you have an advance directive, it does not mean that you don't want to have anything done. So I think the important piece is you can't automatically assume that just because you have it means you're going to stop everything. It could mean that if you have a chronic condition, but there's a reversible treatment option for you, that you would want to have that done and provided for yourself. And that's acceptable, that's fine, and it doesn't mean to stop everything if something can be reversed. Things could happen that we just have to provide a treatment and you'll be okay. You'll still have your chronic condition that may be causing an issue for you, but we read very, very carefully what your wishes are. And how lovely to be able to know that if you're not able to share with us what you want, that somebody will be there to carry that out for you for what you want to have done for you at the end of life. And we are here no matter what hospital you go to. Hospitals are here to help you through that, to help your family through that, and to make sure that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. And I know that from my perspective at Clara Moss, when you talk about the cultural issues that impact us, we are very in tune to the fact that we treat very, very diverse members of our community. We ensure that we have a proper understanding from a cultural sensitivity perspective so that we can appropriately meet your needs and the needs of your families. And I'm sure other hospitals as well are doing that because we want to understand from a religious perspective, from a family perspective, that we are doing everything we need to do for you. And as one of our panelists said, family members not being able to come into an ICU to be with your other children. You know, a lot of that philosophy and thinking is changing because when we care for someone at the end of life and abide by your wishes, we're not just caring for you, but we're caring for your whole entire family. If that means ordering a lunch from your culture to help you and your family get through this during your end time, we'll do that. And it's about rallying all the people who love you so very much to be at your bedside at that time, for them to feel good about ensuring they have done everything they could do to support what your wishes are. And we'll do whatever we need to do to make that happen. If it's a matter of bringing your pet in to be with you, if it's your favorite pillow, if it's your best music you want to have played, we can do that. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about your dignity, it's about your rights, and it's about respecting what you want at the end of the day. And I think any of us would be more than happy to ensure and have you trust that we will carry that out for you no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and taking advantage of this great program. I want to thank our panelists for doing such a great job. We all learned a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Klein, for coming out. This is a very distinguished panel, and we're very fortunate to have individuals of your caliber here educating us, so thank you very much. Also want to thank our township folks. I see Katie back there, and Sue and others who have been involved in this, making this happen. I want to thank all of you for doing this. You know, and I first talked to Kate about coming on, and I actually had a conversation with my children about advanced directives, and well, you know, Dad, what do you think about what's your first directive be? And I said, well, find a cure fast. And they were like, well, no, that's not quite what we had in mind. But I think that it is so important to have this conversation, and it is difficult. It's difficult. I happen to be an only child, and my mom went through a tough period of with some dementia and some other issues, and it was a very difficult period. And I really wrestled, and she didn't lay out exactly what she wanted to have done, and I really wrestled throughout that entire period of what to do, how much to do, and I agonized over it. And I think it would have been better for me, and I'm not just as about me, but just as a child and wanting to do the best for your parent. What do you do? And I think this advanced directive initiative and this conversation goes a long way to making that a lot more of an easy, although it's never easy, but just a lot more, you just feel comfortable about making decisions, because I can see, and we've talked about what you want to have happen. So take advantage of the great resources that are here, and really I admire and thank all of you for coming out and taking advantage. Have a great day.
Thank you. It is very important that you share what your end-of-life wishes are with your loved ones on a pretty daily basis. I am shocked and horrified when I am called to talk to families either in the ICU or in the emergency room, and this is the first time that they're having this conversation. And the families really struggle with what would mom want. So think of it as a gift. Think of it as a present that you're giving to your family members so they're not struggling trying to figure out what's important to you. Both my parents didn't do a written advance directive, but they told us what was important to them. They didn't want, if my dad lived till he was 90, he had a stroke, and my mom said, bring him home. I don't want him dying in the hospital. And he died at home with hospice. And she said, and if I ever get to a place where I don't recognize you and I can't eat and everyone has to take care of me, that is not the life I want to lead. That's not what's important to me. Bring me home and let me go. So it could be as simple as that. We have medicalized birthing and at the end of life so much in our society. And, by understanding what's important to your loved ones, I think that would be, and completing your advance directive would be a great present to give to your family. So I want to thank everyone for attending today in celebration of National Healthcare Decisions Day. I want to thank the panel, Dr. Klein, Mayor Jackson, and all the COIL members who helped put this event together. I would like to say thank you very much.